They put her father in the ground with a folded flag and a secret they never told the public. 11 years later, his daughter walked onto the most brutal special warfare range in the country, 19 years old, carrying his rifle case and wearing a name that made grown men either stand straighter or look away. They looked away. They called her a ghost, a legacy case. Girl playing soldier in her dead father's uniform. They had no idea what she could do. And by the time they found out, it was already too late to take back what they'd said. If this story already has you leaning forward, you're exactly where we want you. Subscribe to the channel right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. We drop stories that hit like a freight train military drama, impossible odds, and the kind of characters that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Drop your city and country in the comments below. We want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in. This one runs long and it earns every minute. The flag was folded 13 times. Maya Sterling watched the whole thing from 20 feet away, standing so still in the Afghan heat that a fly landed on her forearm and she didn't move to brush it off. She was 15 years old and she had not cried since the moment they told her. She wasn't going to start now, not here, not in front of the row of dress uniforms and the small crowd of people who hadn't known her father nearly as well as they thought they did. It was 114 degrees on the tarmac at Fort Arclight, the kind of heat that turns air into something you have to push through. The American flag above the hangar hung completely still, no wind, just heat and silence and the sound of a bugle playing something that Maya had always hated, even before she knew why. Master Sergeant Ethan Sterling had been buried 3 days earlier in Virginia. This was the memorial on the forward base for the people who couldn't make it stateside. The people who had actually known him in the field. There were 41 of them, Maya had counted. A man in his mid-50s with a jaw like carved stone stepped forward and crouched in front of her. He was built the way old soldiers get built, not big, just dense, like he'd been compressed by years of carrying weight. His name tape read Hargrove. He was holding the folded flag with both hands, a pair of dog tags draped over the top. "Your father was the best I ever served with," he said. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't soft, it's controlled. "And I've served with some serious men." Maya looked at the dog tags. She knew them. She'd held them 100 times when she was small, when Ethan would let her pull them out and look at the stamped letters. Sterling, Ethan J. They were warm from being held. "Thank you, sir," she said. Hargrove didn't stand up yet. He studied her face with the kind of thoroughness that made people uncomfortable. But Maya had been trained not to flinch from that either. Her father had taught her that to let them look, because looking isn't knowing. "There's something I need to tell you," Hargrove said. Something that wasn't in the official report. Maya waited. The shot they credited him with, the one that made the papers. 1,140 meters. Enemy spotter on a ridgeline, 2 seconds of exposure. He paused. "The records show 1,140. "I know," Maya said. "The actual distance was 1,480. The number landed between them like something dropped from a height." Maya felt something shift in her chest. Not grief. Grief had already moved in and rearranged the furniture. This was something else. Something colder and sharper, closer to resolve. "They adjusted the number," she said. It wasn't a question. Command felt the real number would draw too much attention. Questions about methodology, equipment, verification. Hargrove's mouth pressed into a flat line. Politics. Even out here. He pressed the flag into her hands. The dog tags clinked softly against the fabric. "He asked me once what I thought the limit was," Hargrove said. "Maximum range for a clean shot under field conditions." I told him whatever the instructors said. He just looked at me and smiled. A pause. He already knew the answer was further than anyone had written down. Maya held the flag against her chest. She could feel the heat coming off the tarmac to the soles of her boots. I won't forget, she said. I know you won't. Hargrove stood, got his eyes. Same thing going on behind them. He walked back into the line of uniforms. Maya stood alone with the flag and the dog tags and a number she would carry in her chest like a second heartbeat for the next 4 years. 1,480 meters. She was going to get there. 4 years and 7 months later, Maya Sterling stepped off a transport vehicle at Pacific Horizon Special Warfare Base with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a long rifle case in her right hand. The case was matte black, worn at the corners, one latch replaced with a newer model that didn't quite match the original hardware. It had been her father's. The base sat on a flat stretch of high desert terrain in the western interior surrounded by low mountains that turned purple at dusk and bone white at noon. Kind of landscape that made you feel exposed, watched. Like the land itself was deciding whether you belonged. She was 19. She had been accepted into the Special Warfare Operator Training Pipeline, the SWOTP, after 3 years of preparation that most people would have called obsessive and that Maya would have called the minimum required. Her scores on the entrance qualification were in the top 4% of all candidates in the program's 12-year history. She knew this because the recruiting officer had told her twice, the second time in a tone that suggested he was impressed. She was not here to be impressive on paper. The processing unit was a long prefab building that smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. Behind the intake desk sat a petty officer second class with a shaved head and the expression of someone who had processed 300 recruits and had started to lose the ability to see them as individuals. He looked at her name on the form. He looked up. Sterling. Yes, as in yes. He looked back down at the form. Right. Welcome to Pacific Horizon. She signed 3 forms, received her bunk assignment, and was directed to the Bravo staging area. Nobody offered to carry anything. She didn't need them to. The staging area held 14 other new arrivals, scattered across benches and kit bags in various states of exhaustion or forced casualness. A few were doing the thing where they sat with their arms resting on their knees and their eyes forward, performing composure. A couple were actually composed. One was asleep, sitting up. Maya found her bunk, set the rifle case underneath it with deliberate care, and sat down to check her kit. That's a Sabre Series case. She looked up. A man was leaning against the bunk frame across the aisle, early 20s, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of easy posture that either meant he was genuinely relaxed or had learned to look that way. His name tape read Tarlo. Good eye, Maya said. Where'd you get it? It was my father's. Tarlo processed that. What's in it? A rifle, obviously. He grinned quick, reflexive, the kind of smile that was a social tool rather than an emotion. Which one? Depends on who's asking. He laughed. Not mocking, just surprised. He dropped the act slightly. Declan Tarlo, 749th out of Bragg. You? Maya Sterling. The name landed differently than it had at the intake desk. Tarlo's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. She watched it happen and cataloged it without reacting. Sterling, he said, not asking. Yeah. Okay. He pushed off the bunk frame and extended a hand. No baggage. Just good to know who I'm bunked near. He shook it. His grip was firm, and he didn't test hers, which she noted as a point in his favor. Across the bay, a voice carried over the ambient noise. Anyone else think it's a little convenient timing? Ethan Sterling's kid showing up at Pacific Horizon right when they're doing the SWOTP showcase? Nobody had to look to know who was talking. Instinctively, several people did anyway. He was sitting on a footlocker, compact and wound tight, with a jaw sharp enough to cast a shadow. His name tape read Kettrick. He had the particular brand of confidence that comes not from experience, but from having never been seriously tested, the kind that would either mature into something real or shatter cleanly. What showcase? Someone asked. Pacific Basin evaluation. 2 weeks out. Whoever tops the qualification metrics gets a recommendation for the forward selection cadre. Kettrick glanced at Maya with the careful indifference of someone performing carelessness. Real convenient time to have a famous name on your record. Maya didn't look at him. She was refolding a thermal base layer with the same focused attention she'd been giving it since before he opened his mouth. "Hey," Tarlo said, "low enough to be private. Don't bother." He does that with everyone. He did it to Martinez on day one, and Martinez outshot him by 12% on the qualification. "Where's Martinez now?" Maya asked. Forward cadre. A pause. "Kettrick's still here." Maya set the folded base layer aside and moved on to the next item in her kit. Staff Sergeant Cole Vance was 32 years old and had been training special warfare operators for 6 of those years, following a field career that had been, by all documented metrics, exceptional. 2 overseas deployments, 1 citation for action under fire that he kept in a drawer he never opened, and a record that read like something you'd invent to make a recruiting poster. What the record didn't mention was Reyes. Corporal David Reyes had been the best shooter in the SWOT selection, 2 cycles before Maya arrived. Top of every category. A kid from New Mexico who moved like he'd been born on a rifle range and had eyes that calculated distance the way other people breathed, automatic, unconscious, precise. Cole had pushed for him, argued the case to command, signed the paperwork that moved him into the forward cadre ahead of schedule. Reyes had been dead for 14 months. A tactical breach that went wrong, a decision made in a compressed window, a shot that would have needed to be perfect and wasn't. Cole still heard the radio call sometimes. At 3 in the morning, in between the ceiling and the dark, "Reyes is down." Say again, "Reyes is down." He hadn't argued for anyone since. First week at Pacific Horizon ran on a schedule that had been designed by someone Maya suspected was either a genius or a sadist to specifically target the gap between how good you thought you were and how good you actually were. The days started at 430, with a 2-mile run in full kit, transitioned into technical drills, and collapsed into evening evaluations that were graded on a rubric that nobody showed you ahead of time. The shooting range sat at the eastern edge of the base, against the foot of the low mountains. 400 meters of manicured lanes for close-range work, and then behind it, through a controlled access corridor, the long range a dry, flat stretch with target frames, set at intervals out to 1,000 meters, with a single lane extending further that nobody had used for general training in 2 years. Maya knew about that last lane before she arrived. She'd looked up the range specifications in the public records. It ran to 1,500 meters at the far wall. She'd noted it the way other people might note a locked door, with interest, without urgency, knowing eventually she would find the key. On the 4th morning, Cole Vance introduced himself to the full cohort in the way instructors introduce themselves when they want to establish the exact nature of the relationship, briefly, without warmth, and in terms that left nothing ambiguous. "I don't care about your qualification scores," he said. He was standing in front of them in the gray pre-dawn, hands loose at his sides, looking at the group, the way a mechanic looks at an engine he's been asked to assess, interested, but skeptical. "I don't care about your recommendation letters. I don't care about your background, your previous unit, or what you benched last month. I kirk out performance here in these conditions, under pressure. That's the only thing that travels forward." He walked slowly in front of the line. "You will be evaluated on marksmanship, tactical positioning, communication discipline, and stress response. Everything is tracked. Some of you will wash out by the end of week 2. That's not a threat, it's a statistical likelihood based on historical completion rates. A beat. Don't make it feel personal when it happens." His eyes moved along the line without stopping. When they reached Maya, they didn't linger, but she felt the quality of the glance the fraction of a second longer than the others. Not attraction, not recognition, assessment. Then he was already looking at Kettrick. "Any questions?" Nobody asked any. The marksmanship evaluation in week 1 was held on a clear morning with a crosswind running from the northwest at approximately 9 miles per hour. Gusting. Unpredictable in the way that desert winds tend to be consistent in direction. Variable in intensity, which meant you couldn't just compensate and hold. You had to read it continuously and adjust in real time. Targets ran from 300 to 700 meters. Standard iron sights permitted for the close end. Optics authorized above 500. The evaluation was scored on hit percentage, split times, and this part surprised several recruits, the written wind calls submitted before each string of fire. "He's grading our calls," Tarlow said under his breath, 2 positions to Maya's left. "Of course he is," Maya said. "The shot is the easy part." "Easy part, Kettrick," echoed from 3 positions to her right, not quietly enough to be private. "Must be nice to think. Shooting's easy." Maya didn't respond. She was watching the grass at the 500-meter berm. The way it moved. The intervals between gusts. The pause 3 seconds, sometimes 4, between peak intensity and fall-off. She wrote her wind call on the form. 9.2 miles per hour, northwest. Variable 4-count lull between peaks. Compensate 0.6, mil right. Fire on the pause. The range officer called the command. She settled the crosshairs, found the grass, felt the wind ease off on its count, and pressed the trigger once. Target registered a hit, 4.7 centimeters left of center. She adjusted 0.3 mil on the next round and hit inside 1 centimeter of dead center. 700 meters, she was the only recruit in the cohort to hit 5 consecutive targets inside a 2-centimeter group. She did not look at Kettrick. She didn't need to. Cole reviewed the paper forms that evening in the instructor's office, a narrow room with a corkboard wall, and a window that looked out toward the long range. He could see the far target frames in the dying light, 600 meters out, looking small and fixed and patient. He went through the recruits in order of performance. When he got to Sterling's form, he sat with it for a moment. The wind calls were exactly right. Not approximately right, exactly right, within decimal margins that required either very good instrumentation or an unusual depth of practical experience. He was 19. He set the form down, picked it up again, set it in a separate stack. He didn't know what to do with it yet. He knew what his instinct said. He knew what the last time he trusted his instinct had cost. He left the form in the stack and went to write the evening summary report without mentioning her scores. By the end of week 2, 3 recruits had voluntarily dropped from the program. One had been administratively removed following a safety failure on the range, a moment of lost muzzle discipline that would have been dangerous in a field environment, and was treated accordingly. That left 11. Kettrick was still in. His performance was solid, not exceptional, but consistent, and he had the social intelligence to position himself near the top of the visible hierarchy without showing his work. He had a way of being present in the right conversations, of making his average scores feel like modesty rather than limitation. Maya had stopped noticing him specifically. She'd categorized him correctly in week 1 and updated that assessment approximately 0 times since. What she was noticing was Cole Vance. Not in the way she'd expected to notice an instructor, not tactically, not as a subject to manage. She noticed the shape of the distance he kept, the way he gave the same feedback to everyone, but calibrated the weight of eye contact differently, depending on what he thought you needed to hear versus what he thought you could use. He was a good instructor, maybe a great one, and the distance he maintained wasn't cold, it was deliberate. Protective. He was protecting something. She wasn't sure what yet. After the evening evaluation in week 2, she was breaking down her rifle in the cleaning-in bay when his shadow fell across the mat. Sterling. She kept her eyes on the bolt carrier group, running a clean patch through the channel. Staff Sergeant. He crouched at the edge of the mat. Not invasive, just close enough to speak at a normal volume and be heard. Where did you learn to read wind like that? She didn't answer immediately. She ran the patch twice, held it to the light, set it aside. My father, she said. Silence. Then here or stateside? Both. She picked up the next component. And on my own. After. He was quiet for a moment in the way that wasn't nothing. It was the sound of someone processing something they hadn't expected. Your calls have been within half decimal on every string. I know. That's not a training result. That's a feel. He paused. Where does that come from? She looked up for the first time. His expression was controlled, but not guarded. There was something in it she didn't have a word for yet. Not warmth, not suspicion. Something caught between the two. Same place everything comes from, she said. Repetition and time and caring more about being right than being fast. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stood. Good session today, he said. Came out flat, like the words had been stripped of the weight they were supposed to carry. He turned and walked toward the exit. Maya looked back at the bolt carrier group. She thought, he's afraid of something. She thought, I'm going to find out what. The situation she hadn't anticipated came in the form of a midnight conversation she wasn't supposed to overhear. She had woken at 230 with the specific wide-awake clarity that sometimes follows a full-force day, the kind of tired that goes all the way around and comes back as alert. She'd gotten up for water and come back through the corridor that ran behind the instructor offices, and she heard two voices through a door left open 2 inches. One was Cole's. The other belonged to the base's senior training officer, Major Delacroix, a man with rectangular reading glasses and the kind of measured calm that comes from having seen too many to react visibly to any of them. Her numbers are outside the training band, Cole was saying. I'm aware. A pause. The sound of something said on a desk. Is there an issue with the numbers? The issue is what to do with them. She's a 19-year-old with 4 weeks of structured training. She has more than 4 weeks, Cole. You know what her father was. Her father was exceptional, and he's dead. The silence that followed had edges. That's a harsh way to frame it, Delacroix said. It's accurate. Cole's voice was controlled but strained, the way a rope is strained when it hasn't broken yet. Exceptional people make mistakes too. They make decisions under pressure that look right on paper and go completely wrong in the field. I've seen it. A stop. I know what happens when you push someone into a position they're not ready for, because the numbers say they should be. Another pause. What are you asking me? Delacroix said. I'm asking you to let me run standard evaluations. Not accelerate her timeline because the name on her file matches a legend. Delacroix's voice was quiet. Cole, if her numbers are what you say they are, I know what the numbers say. Then the question isn't whether she's ready. The question is whether you are. The door didn't close any further. Maya stood in the corridor for 3 seconds, then moved silently back toward the bay. She lay in her bunk in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about what it meant when the person blocking your path wasn't doing it out of malice. She thought about what her father had told her once, sitting in the low folding chair in the garage back home, with the rifle disassembled on the mat between them and the smell of solvent in the air. The hardest shots are the ones where everything is right except your head, he'd said. Conditions, distance, wind, all manageable. But if there's something between you and the target that has nothing to do with the physics, that's what you have to work out first. Everything else is just mechanics. She closed her eyes. Everything else is just mechanics. The Pacific Basin Evaluation Brief was distributed on a Wednesday morning, 8 days before the event. Maya read the document twice on her bunk, then a third time more slowly. 2 teams, Pacific Horizon's SWOTP cohort and the incoming selection group from the Coastal Training Center at Camp Mariner, would compete across 4 categories: tactical movement, communication discipline, field observation, and marksmanship. The marksmanship component would be held at the long range. Distances would scale from 600 meters in the early rounds to a maximum of 1,200 in the finals. The 1,500-meter lane was not mentioned. Kettrick read the document, standing up, and said, loudly enough for the room, 1,200 meters. That's a serious push for a training evaluation. It's not supposed to be comfortable, Tarlos said. It's not uncomfortable if you've put in the work. Kettrick folded the document once along a crisp line and tucked it under his arm. He glanced at Maya. Some of us have. Maya was still reading the fine print. The wind protocol for the evaluation day specified that organizers would not cancel or delay for weather events below Force Level 3 on the range's internal classification system. Force Level 3 was a sustained crosswind of approximately 22 miles per hour. She wrote a note on the corner of the document. She wrote, check historical wind data for this range at this time of year. Yeah. Then she underlined it. 2 nights before the evaluation, she was on the long range alone. She had requested access through the duty officer, filed the appropriate forms, and been granted an open lane period. Between 2,000 and 2,200. Nobody questioned it. The paperwork was in order, and the request was within training guidelines. She set up its 900 meters first, prone position, bipod forward, rear bag under the stock. The wind was running around 7 miles per hour out of the west-northwest, which was lighter than what she'd been working with, but consistent enough to be useful. She fired 40 rounds at 900 in the last of the daylight. Then she moved the target to 1,100 and switched to the low-light scope. She was on her 22nd round at 1,100 when she heard footsteps on the hardpan behind her. She didn't look up. Duty officer said, you'd signed out a lane. Cole's voice. She recognized it by the tempo before he finished the first word. Cleared for 2,200, she said. I know. A pause. I signed the authorization. Fired the round. Hit. Reset. He didn't leave. She could hear him standing there, which meant he'd decided to stay, which meant something had shifted in whatever calculation he was running. What are you trying to prove? He said. Nothing. She moved the bolt, settled back into position. I'm trying to confirm a doping adjustment for crosswind at this range with this cartridge at this temperature. The ballistic tables don't account for the specific density at this altitude. A longer pause. You're doing your own ballistic work. The standard tables are built for sea level. We're at 3,800 feet. The adjustments are published, but they're averaged. I want my own data. She fired. Hit, exhaled. That's stuff. What? Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed quality slightly, the way a room changes when something that was holding tension in it is moved. That's what a professional does. I know, she said, not arrogantly, just as a fact. She fired twice more. Set the rifle down on the bipod with the muzzle pointing safely downrange, and sat up. She looked at him for the first time. He was standing with his arms at his sides and his expression doing something complicated. He looked like a man in the middle of an argument with himself that he hadn't resolved yet. What happened to him? She said. The shooter you're protecting me from not being. Cole went very still. Reyes, she said. She watched the word land. I asked around. He didn't answer. I'm not asking because I want to fight about it, she said. I'm asking because you're the best instructor I've had access to, and I would rather know what you're actually afraid of than spend time working around something I don't understand. He looked at the far target, then back at her. He wasn't ready, Cole said. His numbers were right, his instincts were good, but he'd been pushed into a position that required a margin of experience he didn't have. And when the window compressed, he chose wrong, and you blame yourself for the push. Cole said nothing. Okay, Maya said. She picked up the rifle. For what it's worth, I am not Reyes. Not because I'm better. Because I had 4 years of very specific preparation for exactly this, and I did it alone, without a pipeline, or an instructor, or a program. I know what I can do, and I know where my edges are. She looked at him steadily. I also know I'm not ready for everything. I'm ready for the evaluation. He looked at her for a long time. We'll find out in 2 days, he said. He turned and walked back toward the base lights. Maya turned back to the range. She had 6 more rounds of data to collect. She would collect them. The night before the Pacific Basin evaluation, Maya lay in her bunk with the dog tags in her hand. Sterling, Ethan J. She didn't pray. She didn't talk to him in her head the way she'd heard people describe doing with the dead. She had made her peace with the fact that he was gone in the specific way that people who lose something very young make peace with it, not by getting over it, but by incorporating it so completely that the loss becomes load-bearing, part of the structure. She turned the tags over in her fingers. 1,480 meters, the actual number. In 2 days, the evaluation maxed at 1,200. But she knew the range ran to 1,500. She'd measured it on the schematic and confirmed it on foot, walking the lane after her evening session 3 days ago. The far wall, the last marker. She wasn't here to hit 1,200. She was here because of a number that had never been written down correctly. In a file that said the world's understanding of what was possible was missing a significant decimal point. Closed her hand around the tags. In the bunk across the bay, Tarlo shifted in his sleep. 3 bunks down, Kettrick's breathing was slow and regular. Maya stared at the ceiling. She thought, tomorrow they see what they've been looking at and not seeing. She thought, let them look. She was ready. The evaluation began at 600. And in the instructor's office, Cole Vance sat awake at his desk with a cup of cold coffee and the evaluation roster in front of him. And on the roster was the name Sterling, Maya, and next to it, in a column he hadn't shown anyone, a series of range numbers from her logged sessions that he had been quietly tracking for 2 weeks. Numbers that made his stomach drop in a way that felt dangerously like hope. He hadn't felt that in 14 months. He didn't know what to do with it yet. Picked up his pen, set it down, and waited for morning. The morning of the Pacific Basin evaluation arrived the way bad weather arrives in the desert, not with drama, but with a slow, pressurizing certainty that something was about to change the shape of the air. Maya was awake at 415. She had slept 4 hours and felt it in the back of her neck, a low tightness that she recognized and knew how to work around. She dressed in the dark, laced her boots by feel, and sat for 3 minutes on the edge of her bunk, with her hands loose in her lap, running the day forward in her head. Not visualization in the motivational poster sense, just logistics. Sequence. What she would need to do, in what order, under what conditions, with what variables, she could not yet know. Her father had called it preloading. You can't remove uncertainty, he'd said once, but you can reduce the distance between what you expect and what you find. The smaller that gap, the faster you move when it matters. Clipped the dog tags inside her shirt, picked up her kit bag, and walked out of the bay without waking anyone. The range compound was already lit when she arrived. Ground crew had been out since 300 setting the target frames, and the range safety officer, a compact woman named Sergeant First Class Obina, who ran her lane assignments with the efficiency of someone who had lost patience with inefficiency years ago, was working through. Pre-event checklist under a portable work light. Maya checked in, received her lane assignment, her firing order, and the morning's official weather reading. Sustained wind, 11 miles per hour, west-northwest. Gusting to 17. Variable. Stronger than yesterday. Weaker than what she'd been hoping for. Quenched, which meant the conditions would probably deteriorate as the morning warmed and the thermal differentials between the mountain face and the flat range increased. She noted all of it and said nothing. The Camp Mariner Selection Group arrived at 530 in 2 vehicles, 8 operators and their range cadre, moving through the compound with the particular energy of a team that has traveled to win something. They were older on average than Pacific Horizon's cohort, mid-20s, most of them, with the kind of quiet coordination that comes from time working together rather than parallel training. Their lead shooter was a man named Gaffney, Maya heard his name before she saw him. Someone from Mariner was talking through the morning's lineup with their range NCO, and Gaffney's name came up 3 times in 4 sentences. She filed it. When she saw him, she understood the emphasis. He was built for a rifle long-limbed, with the patient stillness of someone who spent a lot of time horizontal on cold ground. He moved through the staging area with economical confidence, setting up his kit without ceremony or performance. He wasn't showing off. He didn't need to. He was the kind of shooter who made the other shooters in the room recalibrate their own confidence. Kettrick noticed him too. Maya watched Kettrick watch Gaffney, with an expression he was trying to keep neutral and not quite managing. Tarlo appeared at Maya's shoulder. "That's their ringer," he said. "Probably. He shot a 0.8 MOA group at 800 meters in last year's mountain phase evaluation. Someone said it's in the record. 0.8 is respectable," Maya said. "Respectable." Tarlo looked at her sideways. "You're either very confident or very calm." "I'm calculating wind adjustments," she said. "I'll be calm later." He laughed once, short and real. "Fair enough." The evaluation ran in 4 stages across the morning. Tactical movement first, a timed course through a simulated compound environment with designated decision points that were evaluated not on speed alone, but on the choice sequence made at each node. Maya had studied the doctrine manual for compound clearance twice in the past week and had run the logic tree in her head enough times that the decisions at each point felt more like confirmation than improvisation. She moved through the course in the middle of the cohort's time range, not fastest, not slowest. She made no errors at the decision points. She flagged an ambush position that 3 of the 12 evalues had missed. Obina made a mark on her clipboard. Communication discipline came next, a scenario-based exercise where pairs of recruits managed a simulated radio net while receiving degraded or conflicting information and had to maintain clear, accurate reporting without editorializing or losing the thread of the net. Maya was paired with Tarlo, who had a natural radio voice and the discipline to use it correctly. They worked cleanly together, which surprised neither of them. Field observation was a static exercise that lasted 40 minutes, involving a prepared scene across a 400-meter field that contained 17 deliberate anomalies, disturbed ground, misplaced equipment, a thermal signature from a buried element, a reflection source. Recruits had 8 minutes to complete their observation form. Maya identified 16 of 17. The one she missed was a partial boot print in shadow at the far left of the observation zone, at the edge of the field of view. She marked her form with a note, possible indicator, at 380-meter left margin, insufficient certainty for confirmation. She flagged it as a maybe, rather than leaving it blank. Obina didn't show any reaction when she collected the form. She never showed any reaction. The morning broke for a 30-minute stand-down between field observation and the marksmanship phase. Maya ate half a protein bar, drank water, and found a spot on the low concrete barrier at the edge of the staging area where she could watch the wind indicators at the 600 and 900-meter marks simultaneously. The wind had picked up, running at 14 sustained now, with the gusts reaching into the low 20s. The lull pattern had shortened. She was seeing 4-count pauses. In the morning, these were running 2 to 3. She adjusted her internal model. Kettrick dropped onto the barrier next to her, which she hadn't anticipated, and sat with forearms on his knees in a posture that was probably meant to look relaxed. "Observed anything useful?" he said. "Yes." He waited for her to continue. She didn't. "Look," he said, dropping his voice, going for something like reasonableness. "I haven't been." He stopped. Started again. "The name thing. What I said when you got here. That was tactical," she said. He frowned. "What?" "You were establishing a frame for the cohort. New arrival with a famous name is either a target or an ally. You chose target to see which one I was." She looked at him directly. "It's a reasonable move. I'm not upset about it." Kettrick blinked. Whatever he'd expected from this conversation, It wasn't that. Okay, he said after a moment. So which one are you? I'm neither. I'm just here to shoot. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then Gaffney's going to put up a number in the finals that's going to be hard to follow. I know. If Pacific Horizon doesn't match it, the evaluation goes to Mariner on points. I know, he looked at her. You're not worried. I'm focused, she said. Those are different things. She looked back at the wind indicators. I'd go check your zero before the phase starts. The temperature dropped 4 degrees since 600, and the density shifted. A pause. Right, he said. He stood up, then stopped. For what it's worth. He didn't finish the sentence. He walked toward the armorer's station. Maya watched the windsock at 600 meters curl and flatten and curl again. 2-count lull. She updated her model. Cole Vance stood at the rear of the range cadre's observation position, a low-covered platform at the center of the firing line that gave the instructors a sight line to all active lanes simultaneously. He had his arms crossed, which was his default posture, and a pair of binoculars around his neck that he had not yet raised. Major Delacroix was 2 positions to his right, also watching the pre-phase staging with the detached focus of a man who is watching for the thing underneath the thing. Wind's picking up, Delacroix said. It will keep picking up through early afternoon, Cole said. Thermal differential. By the time they get to the 1,200 round, it'll be running 18 to 20 sustain. That'll shake the groups. Yes. A pause. How's your cohort looking? Delacroix asked. Cole was quiet for a moment. He was watching Maya, who had returned to the concrete barrier and was, as far as he could tell, staring at nothing in particular across the range. He'd watched her do this enough times to know it wasn't nothing. Competitive, he said. Sterling? He didn't answer immediately. Then she adjusted her zero at 530 before anyone else was on the range. She's been reading the wind indicators for the last 20 minutes. How's she look? Cole uncrossed his arms, crossed them again. Like she knows something we haven't told her yet. Delacroix made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. That's either very good or very bad. I know, Cole said. I'm working on which one. Marksmanship phase that opened at 1,040 after the wind had done exactly what Maya had predicted, climbed through the morning and settled into a running 16 with gusts that peaked at 23 and dropped back inside 2 counts. The range officer confirmed the official reading at 1,035 and called it to all firing positions via the range net. The sequence was structured in elimination format, not by person, but by distance. Every E-value fired a 5-round string at each distance, and scores were cumulative. The elimination line was drawn at 800 meters. Anyone who could not maintain a group inside 4 MOA at 800 was stepped down to a contributing score only, not a competitive one. At 600 meters, 14 of the 16 E-values, 8 from Pacific Horizon, 8 from Camp Mariner posted competitive groups. Maya hit a 0.9 MOA group across her 5 shots, which was the best of the morning's first round. Gaffney hit 1.1 MOA. Kettrick hit 2.4, which was inside the qualifying threshold but not impressive in context. Nobody said anything about Maya's group. She watched the range officer record it and move to the staging position for the transition to 800. At 800 meters, the wind made its first serious argument. A long gust came in at the beginning of the second shooter's string, pushing his impact point nearly 8 inches off the call. He adjusted, recovered, but the wind had introduced itself to the day as a factor, and now everyone was running their adjustments more carefully. Maya was the 5th shooter in the sequence. She went prone behind the rifle, settled her breathing, watched the grass at the 400-meter berm to get a read on the behavior near the midpoint, and committed her call to the spotting card. Her spotter for the exercise was a Mariner evalu named Cortez, who had drawn the assignment by lot and looked vaguely uncertain about the arrangement. Wind? Maya asked. Cortez looked at his instruments. 15.2 sustained north-northwest. Gusts 22. I know. What's the lull pattern? He checked the timing logs on his device. 2 to 3 count. 2. Call me the peak and drop it. I want to hear when it backs off. Cortez hesitated for half a second, then adjusted his focus to the wind gauge. Okay. Building a pause. Peak. Dropping now. Maya fired on the first count of the drop. The impact was 1.1 centimeters from center. She fired 4 more times on the same protocol. The group at 800 meters was 1.2 MOA into the wind, under conditions that were chewing up half the other shooters' groups by 2 to 3 times that margin. Cortez looked at the spotting scope, then at her, then back at the scope. How'd you know it was 2 count? He said. I've been watching it since 900. He absorbed this. You watch the range for 2 hours before a phase? When the phase matters, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Can I watch with you next time? Maya almost smiled. Sure, she said. At 1,000 meters, the evaluation field had narrowed. 3 of Mariner's shooters and 2 of Pacific Horizon's had posted scores below the competitive threshold at 800, not eliminated from the day, but effectively out of the running for the evaluation's primary metric. That left 11 active competitors for the final 2 distances. Gaffney shot first at 1,000. He was very good. He took his time, read the wind with the methodical patience of someone who had done this at distances like this many times, and put 5 rounds into a 1.4 MOA group that drew a quiet, appreciative sound from the Mariner cadre. It was the kind of shooting that didn't need commentary, it described itself. Cole watched from the observation platform and didn't write anything down. He had stopped writing things down an hour ago. He was watching. Maya was 4th in the sequence at 1,000 meters. She set up the same way. She always set up bipod forward, rear bag positioned with 2 adjustments that she made so quickly they were almost invisible. Cheek weld settled, breathing pattern established. Cortez called the wind, and she corrected him once on the lull timing, and then she fired. 5 rounds. The process from settled position to final round took just under 4 minutes. The group was 1.1 MOA, tighter than Gaffney. The range officer called the measurement twice, checking the instrumentation. Then she confirmed it once into the range net and moved to the next shooter. From the Mariner cadres section, Maya heard something that wasn't quite silence. More like the sound of a group of people who had collectively recalibrated what they expected to see today. Kettrick said nothing. He was staring at the target board with an expression she couldn't fully read, from where she was something between concentration and the particular blankness of a man revising an opinion he'd held for weeks. Cole still had not raised the binoculars. He didn't need them. The 1,200-meter round was scheduled for 1,300. The break between the 1,000 and 1,200 rounds was 90 minutes, which the range officer used to reset the target frames and which most of the evalues used to eat, hydrate, and manage the accumulating weight of a long competition day. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that high concentration work produces. It's not physical, but it shares the same quality as physical fatigue. It compounds, and it is possible to push through it into a performance gap without realizing you've crossed the line until after you've missed something. Maya ate her remaining protein bar and drank 3/4 of her water. She did not review her notes. She had internalized what she needed. Reviewing at this stage would be a form of second-guessing, and second-guessing at 1,200 meters costs you fractions of a second that you do not have. She was sitting with her back against the concrete barrier, eyes closed, when she heard boots stop near her. She opened her eyes. Cole was crouching in front of her at a distance that was not intrusive. He had his range notebook in one hand. He was not holding it the way he held it when he was using it. 1,200-meter protocol, he said. His voice was neutral in the specific way a voice goes neutral when the neutrality is deliberate. 5-round string, same as the rest. But the range officer is running it differently than the published brief. They've added a variable target. The primary frame will be static, but a secondary frame at the 1,200 position will appear at a randomized interval within a 3-second window. Shooters will engage the primary on schedule, then transition to the secondary when it appears. Both targets are scored. Maya looked at him. That's not in the brief. No. When did you find out this morning? A pause. I asked the range officer to modify the final phase. Conditions matched a variant I wanted to test. She understood what he wasn't saying. He had made the evaluation harder. He had introduced the variable target, the transition requirement, specifically, and he was telling her now, during the break, before the phase. He was not telling the others. She felt the full weight of what that meant land in her chest. Why? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, because I needed to see if you can read the unexpected. Not just conditions you've prepared for. He looked at her, steadily. Anyone can shoot what they practiced. I need to know what happens when the scenario changes inside the window. You're running this on everyone? Yes, but you're only telling me. He didn't answer, which was an answer. She held his gaze. I'm not going to tell anyone else. I know, he said. He stood. That's not why I told you. He turned to leave, then stopped. He turned back. Your win calls at 800 were inside half decimal. Your 1,000 group was tighter than anything on this range this year, under these conditions. He said it without the weight of a compliment, just as an accounting of fact. The way he'd told her the 1,480-meter number hadn't been in the file. Information, not praise. Whatever you've been doing out there on the evening range, keep doing it. He walked away. Maya sat with her back against the concrete, and her eyes on the mid-range windsocks, and said nothing to anyone for the remaining 70 minutes of the break. The information moved through her and settled into her posture and her breathing without changing anything visible about her expression. Inside, something had shifted. She knew why now. She knew what he was running and why and what the variable target meant, not just as a test condition, but as a signal about the kind of situation she would eventually need to be ready for. Not a controlled range, not a prepared scenario. A moment when the target moves and you have maybe 1 second to recalibrate and fire cleanly. Her father had drilled that. He'd called it the gift of the unexpected. The range gives you everything in order, he'd said. The field gives you nothing in order. If you can find stillness when the order breaks, that's the skill that keeps people alive. She ran the transition sequence in her head. Primary engagement, bolt cycle, shift approximately 0.8 seconds if her movement was clean, acquire secondary. Read the new angle and distance differential. Adjust, press. She ran it again and again, not drilling, just measuring the shape of it, making sure she knew where the edges were. 1,255. The E-values were called to the 1,200-meter firing line. The wind had reached 19 sustained, gusting to 24 on a pattern that had shortened from the morning's 2 count to almost no lull at all. The gusts were nearly continuous now, with small gaps of lesser intensity that were the only windows available for a clean press. Gaffney went first. He engaged the primary target at 1,200 meters with his first 3 rounds, took 4.3 seconds to acquire the secondary when it appeared, and put 2 rounds on it. The group on the primary was clean. The transition showed the seam. The 4.3-second acquisition was the mark of a shooter adapting in real time to an unexpected condition, which was honest and professional, but it was also a gap that could be measured. Mariner's cadre was quiet through his string. They'd also received no warning of the variable target. The 2nd through 7th shooters ran the phase with varying results. 2 missed the secondary entirely. The transition happened too fast for their acquisition speed under the wind conditions. 3 hit the secondary with 1 round. 1 hit both rounds on the secondary in a 2.1 second acquisition, which was good. Nobody had beaten Gaffney on the combined score by the time Maya stepped into the lane. She went prone. She set up in the same sequence she always did, and in the quality of her setup, the absence of wasted motion, the particular way she settled her cheek to the stock, the way her body had memorized Cortez, watching from the spotting position, recognized something he hadn't been able to name when he'd first been assigned to her. She wasn't setting up. She was arriving. Wind call, he said. 19, north-northwest. No clean lull. I'm firing on the relative valley between peaks. You're going to give me a count of 3, starting from the last peak, and I fire on 1. Cortez looked at his gauge. That's inside a half-second window. I know. He stopped. Okay. She fired the first round on his count. The primary target registered a hit 2.1 centimeters right of center. She cycled the bolt, reacquired, fired on the next count. Inside 1.5 centimeters. Third round on count. Inside 1 centimeter. The secondary target appeared in the middle of her fourth round's firing. Cycle an audible tone, followed by the frame, rising into position at the 1,200 meter position, but 40 degrees opposite set from the primary, at a distance that worked out to 1,240 meters, accounting for the angle differential. She didn't freeze. She didn't rush. She shifted. The movement took 1.1 seconds. She reacquired. The wind had been running on a consistent degraded peak cycle, and she was on a valley. She fired. The secondary target registered a hit. 3.2 centimeters from center, not her best, but clean. Conditions at 1,240 meters with a 40-degree offset and a 19-mile sustained crosswind were not conditions that produce inside centimeter groups unless everything was exactly right, and today everything was close but not exact. She fired the 5th round on the primary, cycled, moved back to the secondary, fired, hit. She kept her cheek on the stock for 2 seconds after the last round, looking through the scope at what she'd put on the board, and then she let herself exhale all the way. Cortez was looking at the spotting scope for a long time. All 7 rounds scored, he said finally. Primary group is, he paused. Primary group is 0.9 MOA. He looked at her. She was already pushing herself up off the mat, dusting grit from her forearms. What's my secondary acquisition time? She said. He checked the data pad. 1.1 seconds. She nodded, packed the rear bag, stowed the shell casings in the catch bag. That's 3 seconds faster than Gaffney, Cortez said. I know. She picked up her kit bag. Not about beating Gaffney. It's about the window. If the window's 1.1 seconds, I take 1.1 seconds. If it's 0.5, I take 0.5. Cortez watched her walk toward the staging area. He looked back at the spotting scope. He looked back at her, picked up his radio, and made a quiet call to his own cadre NCO that lasted about 12 seconds. And whatever he said produced a long silence on the other end before anyone responded. The evaluation results were consolidated at 1,530 and posted to the range officer's board in the order they would be formally briefed to the command element at 1,700. Pacific Horizon's cohort had outscored Camp Mariner on 3 of the 4 phases: communication, discipline, field observation, and marksmanship. Mariner had narrowly edged them on tactical movement, attributable mainly to the cohort's 2 lowest scoring E-values on that phase. Top of the marksmanship sheet, printed in the range officer's precise all caps, Sterling M. 97.4, composite. Gaffney was second at 92.1. The third name was Tarlow at 88.7. Kettrick was ninth. Maya read the board without expression, then moved to the water station and refilled her bottle. When she turned around, Tarlow was behind her. 97.4, he said. Yeah. You know what the range record was before today? 94.2, she said. Set 4 years ago. He stared at her. You already knew the record. I looked it up when I looked up the range specs. He was quiet for a moment. Then he started laughing. Not the reflex laugh from the first week, the social tool. A real one, from somewhere unguarded. "You are unbelievable," he said. "You looked up the range record. Knowledge reduces surprise," she said. "My father said that." Tarlo's laugh faded into something quieter. "He sounds like he was something." "He was." She looked at the board one more time. "Now I am." She said it without drama. Just as a fact, the same way she called the wind. From across the staging area, Cole stood near the observation platform, reading the consolidated sheet in his hand. Delacroix was next to him, saying something at low volume. Cole wasn't listening. He was looking at Maya's composite score and running a private arithmetic in his head that had nothing to do with points and everything to do with a decision he'd been avoiding for 14 months. His jaw was tight. His eyes were still. He turned the page. At the bottom of the sheet, below the scores, was a notation from the range officer, an administrative flag that would have been routine on any other day, in any other context, attached to any other name. It read, "Evaluate Sterling requests voluntary access to Lane 7 extension. 1,500-meter marker, submitted as a post-evaluation individual performance request. Pending cadre authorization." Cole read it twice, then a third time. His hand holding the sheet was very still. He looked up. Across the staging area, Maya was drinking water and watching the windsocks with the patient attention of someone who is not watching. The windsocks, who is watching a future she's already calculated and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up to. Cole looked back at the request. He was still running the arithmetic. He had not yet decided, but something in his chest, in the hollow place that had been there for 14 months, something in there had shifted. He folded the sheet along the notation line and walked toward the cadre office, without speaking to anyone. Cadre office door was still swinging shut behind Cole when Delacroix caught up to him. The major didn't knock. He stepped in and closed the door himself, and the sound of the range, the wind, the distant radio chatter, the equipment being broken down and crated, dropped to a murmur behind the prefab walls. Cole was standing at the desk, still holding the folded sheet. He hadn't set it down yet. "You read the request," Delacroix said. "I read it." And Cole set the sheet on the desk, pressed it flat with 2 fingers, smoothing the fold line. She submitted it through the correct channel. Voluntary individual performance request. Post-evaluation, no range conflict, no resource claim beyond the lane itself. Technically valid. Completely valid. Delacroix moved to the window, looked out at the range. Target frames at 1,200 meters were being walked in by the ground crew. The frames folded and stacked with the mechanical patience of men who had done this 1,000 times. Beyond them, the flat plain stretched out to the base of the mountain, and at the far end of Lane 7, barely visible from here, the 1,500-meter marker stood in the afternoon light like something that had been waiting. "You're going to approve it," Delacroix said. Cole looked at the sheet, then at the window. "I haven't decided." "Cole," I said, "I haven't decided." Delacroix turned from the window. He had the expression of a man who has watched another man wrestle with the same thing from enough different angles that he now knows the shape of the match better than the man wrestling it. Her composite was 97.4. The range record before today was 94.2, and it stood for 4 years. "I know." Under variable wind, modified phase protocol, against a Mariner team that brought their #1 shooter. "I know, and she still wants more. She wants Lane 7 extension." Cole's voice was flat. 1,500 meters. "That's not more. That's a different category." "Yes," Delacroix said. "It is." The silence between them had the particular density of 2 people who have already had the important part of the argument and are now navigating the territory on the other side of it. "She told me last night," Cole said, "that she knows what she can do, and she knows where her edges are." He looked at the sheet. "I believed her when she said it. That's the problem." "That's not a problem." It's a problem for me." He picked the sheet up and looked at it again. Not at the words, but at the shape of the thing, the formal request language, the calm specificity of it, the lane number written in her handwriting in the signature field. Because the last time I believed someone when they said it, I was right about the ability and wrong about the context. Delacroix was quiet for a moment. Then, Reyes was 22 years old with 8 months of field training, and you pushed him into a forward slot 2 cycles ahead of his cohort because the numbers looked like a future you wanted to see. He said it without cruelty, as a fact, the same way Maya called the wind. She is not that. Whatever she is not that. Cole set the sheet down again. He picked up a pen. He authorized the request in 2 lines of text and his signature and handed it to Delacroix without looking at it again. Scheduled it for 700 tomorrow, he said, before the wind builds. Delacroix took the sheet. Who's her spotter? I'll spot for her, Cole said. Delacroix looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded and left. Cole stood in the empty office and looked at the window and the mountain and the long flat distance between here and the place where Lane 7 ended. 1,500 meters. He had never seen a shot made at that distance under field conditions. Not in person. He had seen the data from documented attempts, 2 in the program's history, both aborted, neither completed cleanly. He thought about what Hargrove had told Maya at Fort Arclight in the heat, with the folded flag. He didn't know the details. He'd found the connection through the program's intakes, records, the Fort Arclight memorial date, the name Hargrove, the linkage to Ethan Sterling's classified performance file. He hadn't read the classified portion. He didn't have the clearance. But he knew what 1,480 meant. He'd done the math the first night he'd tracked her range data. He stood at the window until the range crew finished crating the last target frame, and then he went to check the Lane 7 extension himself, on foot, before dark. The news moved through the eValue cohort, the way information moves through any small closed group in pieces, at different speeds, with varying degrees of accuracy, depending on who was carrying it. Tarlo heard it from the duty officer's assistant, who mentioned it in passing while signing out range equipment. He went to find Maya immediately. She was in the cleaning bay, working through the rifle's post-evaluation maintenance, with the methodical focus of someone who has always understood that the ritual of caring for the instrument is part of the discipline of using it. 18. The bore was clean. She was on the bolt carrier group, running a detailed inspection with a penlight that caught the metal's geometry in sharp relief. Tarlo sat down across from her on the mat. Lane 7 extension, he said. She didn't look up. Who told you? Does it matter? She held the bolt carrier group to the light, turned it once, set it down. No, 1,500 meters. He said, the number the way people say a number that doesn't feel real. Maya. It's a lane measurement. It's not a record attempt. But submitted a performance request for a 1,500 meter shot on the day you just broke the range record. It's not a record attempt, she said again. It's a data point. I've been building ballistic data for this range for 2 weeks. 1,500 is the last data point. He was quiet for a moment. You know what the distance means. She picked up the bolt carrier group and fitted it back into the receiver. Yes. Your father? Yes. Tarlo pressed his mouth together. He looked at the rifle case, where it sat against the cleaning bench, worn at the corners, one replaced latch. He thought about asking and decided not to. 700 tomorrow? He said. The wind holds. Can I be there? She looked at him for the first time since he sat down. He was serious. Not curious serious. The distinction mattered. Check with Obina, she said. If she clears observers, you can be there. He nodded and stood. He was almost to the door when she spoke again. Declan. He turned. It might not go clean, she said. Conditions have to align. If they don't align, there's no shot. I'm not forcing it. I know, he said. That's why I want to be there. He left. Maya looked at the assembled rifle. She ran a function check from memory each step completed in sequence, without looking at a manual she hadn't needed in 3 years. And then she set it back in the case and closed the latches. The Mariner contingent departed Pacific Horizon at 1,830. 3 vehicles loading from the vehicle pool near the main gate. Maya was at the water station near the processing unit when the vehicles moved through and didn't pay particular attention to them until one stopped. Gaffney stepped out. He walked toward her with the unhurried pace of someone who has made a decision about something and is simply carrying it out. He stopped at a conversational distance, not confrontational, not warm, either somewhere neutral, the way two professionals stand when they are being honest with each other. "You broke the record," he said. "I know. I wasn't expecting that." He said it without resentment. "I want to be clear, I'm not saying it as a problem. I'm saying it because it's true, and I thought you should hear it from someone on the other side." Maya looked at him. He had the eyes of a man who spent a lot of time at long distance, slightly squinted even at close range, a habit the eye sockets had accommodated over years. "Thank you," she said. "The secondary acquisition time," he said. 1.1 seconds. I was at 4.3. Conditions were similar. Conditions were identical. He paused. "You knew about the variable target." It wasn't an accusation. He'd arrived at it through simple subtraction, her acquisition time, versus his, under the same conditions, in the same phase. Maya said nothing. He looked at her for a moment. "Doesn't matter how you knew. What matters is you were ready for it, and I wasn't." He extended a hand. "Good shooting." She shook it. "You too." He started to turn back to the vehicle, then stopped. "I heard about tomorrow," she waited. "Lane. 7 extension." He looked at her steadily. "I won't ask what you're trying to prove. I know you're not trying to prove anything, you already proved it today." A pause. "I just hope the wind cooperates." She watched the vehicle pull out. She thought, so do I. At 345 that night, Maya woke to the sound of nothing. No wind. She lay still for 30 seconds, confirming the absence the fabric of the tent structures on the base perimeter, which had been moving in the sustained evening wind for days, was hanging quiet. The temperature had dropped, and the air pressure had changed while she slept, and for the first time in days the desert was completely, almost unnervingly still. The thermal differential would start building again by 800. The window between now and the wind's return was not infinite, but it was enough. She got up, got dressed, went to the range. Cole was already at lane 7 extension when she arrived at 610. He had set up the spotting scope, a Nightforce 2060X, on a tripod offset 2 meters to her left at the correct parallax distance. He had the range data pad with the atmospheric readings logged from the last 3 hours, which he had apparently been doing since before she woke. The data pad showed pressure, temperature, humidity, density, altitude, time, and wind, all zeros or near zeros. He didn't look up when she walked up. Pressure's down 0.4 since midnight. Density altitude is 3,640 feet, slightly lower than yesterday afternoon. Wind recorded at 1.2 knots as of 600 from the southeast. It'll change when the sun gets above that ridgeline. He pointed at the mountain's eastern edge, where the sky was beginning to separate gray from black. "That's maybe 90 minutes. 60, Maya said. He looked at her. "The thermal kicks before full sunrise at this elevation," she said. "Look at the shadow line on the face." He looked at the mountain. The shadow was already moving, slowly but moving. He had lived at this base for 6 years and had never thought to track the shadow movement against the thermal schedule. 60 minutes, he said. He said it as a correction to himself, not to her. "Then we need to be in position inside 40. I'm ready when you are." He looked at the case in her hand. "You sighted this in yesterday morning and the evening before. At what temperature?" 55 degrees. Current temp is 48. I'll adjust 3 clicks down on elevation. He made a note. "What's your intended firing position?" "Prone. Bipod with rear bag. Same as yesterday. Target is a 12 by 12 IPSC steel at the 1,500 mark. He paused. Wind flag markers are set at 300, 600, 900, 1,000, 200, and 1,400. 5 read points. What's at the 1,400 mark? A secondary flag rig I set us this morning. He said it without emphasis. The existing layout only ran to 1,200. She looked at him. He had gotten up before 300 and come out to the range in the dark and set up an additional wind flag at 1,400 meters. She didn't say anything about it. She bent down, opened the case, and began the setup. Tarlo arrived at 630 with Obina, who had cleared 2 observers for the session. The other observer was someone Maya hadn't expected, Delacroix, in civilian clothes and range glasses, who stood to the left of the observation position and said nothing to anyone. Kettrick was not there. She had not expected him to be, and she was not thinking about him. She was in position at 642. The rifle was settled. Bipod was forward, weight distributed evenly, rear bag under the toe of the stock. She had shot from this position so many times that the geometry of it was less a conscious decision than a physical memory. Her body knew where to be and went there the way water goes to a level. The atmosphere was almost completely still. Almost. At 1.2 knots from the southeast, there was a trace of wind, not enough to require a significant lateral adjustment at most ranges. At 1,500 meters, 1.2 knots from a 45-degree angle to the line of fire produced approximately 1.8 inches of drift. She could hold for that. She could hold for that in her sleep. The unknown variable was what the wind did at each of the 5 read points between here and the target. It might be 1.2 everywhere. It might be 3 knots at the 600-meter mark and 0.5 at the 1,200. Each flag would tell her something, and the sum of what they told her, what would produce her firing solution. She looked at each flag in sequence. She called each one to Cole in a low, precise voice. 301.1 from south-southeast. Confirmed, Cole said. 601.4 from south, slight cant to east. Confirmed. 901. Negligible, confirmed. 1,201.3 from east. Cole was quiet for half a second. I read 1.2. She was already on the next flag. 1,401.6 from east-southeast. He rechecked. Confirmed 1.6. The wind at 1,400 was stronger and had rotated east. That meant the shot would encounter increasing drift in the final 100 meters, the last and most critical phase of the bullet's travel, where even fractional drift compounds the dispersion at impact. She made the calculation. The sum of the 5 readings, weighted by the proportion of travel each represented, gave her an average effective wind of 1.38 knots with a net eastward cant. Lateral correction, 0.4 mil right. Elevation at 1,500 meters at this temperature and density altitude. The tables said 14.8 mil up from her 100 meters 0. She'd been building her own data at this range, and her numbers said 14.6 because the tables were averaged, and her rifle had a specific harmonic profile that ran slightly flatter than the published standard. She set 14.6 up, 0.4 right. She took 3 full breaths. Let the third one halfway out. Let her body settle against the earth. Cole said nothing. He was watching the flags, like she was watching the target. The steel plate at 1,500 meters was a rectangle in the gray morning light, small as a thumbnail at this distance, even through the scope. The crosshairs rested on it with the patient steadiness of something that has found what it was looking for. She waited. Not for the wind to die. It wasn't going to die. She was waiting for the moment when the 5-point read stabilized into a consistent pattern that she could predict accurately enough to know what the bullet would find when it got there. The atmosphere was a living system. You didn't shoot through it, you worked with it. You found the moment when its behavior was most knowable, and you put the round into that moment. Her heartbeat was very slow. At the periphery of her focus, she was aware of Cole holding his breath, of Tarlo standing completely still behind the observation position, of Delacroix with his arms crossed and his reading glasses on, watching the flags. She was aware of all of it and in contact with none of it. The flags moved in a specific sequence: 300, 600, 900 held consistent, 1,000, 200 shifted 0.1 east, 1,000, 400 held. There, she pressed the trigger. The rifle moved. Her shoulder absorbed it. She cycled the bolt without lifting from the stock. The sound of the shot went out across the flat plain and came back from the mountain face in a short, sharp echo. From the spotting scope, Cole was still then. Wait. She waited. 12 seconds. At this distance, she could calculate the flight time. The bullet was supersonic at launch, but would have dropped below the speed of sound before impact, and the round would take close to 2 seconds to travel. Steel would ring on impact, and the sound would take another 4.4 seconds to travel back. She was at 6 seconds when Cole said, very quietly, hit. She did not move, did not exhale all the way, did not do any of the things that would allow a flood of feeling in before she'd finished the work. Where? She said. He looked through the spotting scope for a long moment. The morning light was still low, and the scope was working against a dark target in gray atmosphere. He adjusted the magnification up. Then, upper left quadrant. Approximately 3 inches from center at 10 o'clock. She looked at the atmospheric data in her head. The drift at 400,000 to 400 had run 1.6 east. She had called 1.38 average and held accordingly. 3-inch deviation at 10 o'clock was consistent with a slight under-read on the final 100-meter eastward cant. The 1,400 flag was reading low, she said. Actual wind in the final 100 was closer to 1.9. You think? Upper left at 10 o'clock on a right cant wind that's slightly stronger than you held for. Yes. Cole was quiet. Then adjust 0.1 mil right and try again. She made the adjustment without moving from position. Found the flags again. Ran the read. This time the 1,400-meter flag was running at 1.7. The wind had increased slightly as the sun continued its work on the ridgeline shadow. She adjusted her held correction from 0.4 to 0.5 mil right. Breathed. Waited for the same pattern in the flags: 300, 600, 900 holding, 1,000, 200 stable, 1,000, 400 steady at its current rate. Pressed. The shot went out. The echo came back. From the spotting scope, a pause. A longer pause. Hit, Cole said. His voice had changed. Center mass. Inside 1 inch. She still didn't move. Behind her, Tarlo made a sound that was not quite a word. Obina's clipboard hit the ground, and she bent to pick it up without looking away from the range. Delacroix uncrossed his arms. Maya pressed her cheek against the stock for 2 full seconds and looked through the scope at a steel plate at the far end of a desert plain that her father had never gotten to stand in front of, and she let herself feel exactly one thing: the specific, cold, profound satisfaction of a thing that was always going to be true finally becoming visible. Then she cycled the bolt, safed the rifle, and began the process of sitting up. Cole was standing over the spotting scope. He hadn't moved from that position. He was looking at the data pad, then at the range, then at the data pad, again running his own arithmetic, cross-referencing the atmospheric data against what he'd seen, confirming that the shot was what it was and not something he'd read wrong. He looked up at Maya. She was on her feet now, brushing grit from her forearms. She wasn't looking at him. She was breaking down the rear bag, releasing the bipod tension, running through the post-shot protocol in the same sequence she always did. Sterling, he said. She looked up. He didn't have the words organized. She could see that's on his face the specific expression of a man who has prepared a position and arrived at the moment, only to find the position doesn't fit. He had been running the arithmetic on her for weeks, adding up the data points, and the number he'd arrived at was the number he'd always been arriving at and had refused to write down. "I owe you," he started. "You don't owe me anything," she said. Not unkindly. "You were doing your job. I was protecting myself." She looked at him steadily. "And now you know what I can do. So, what do you do with it?" He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then Tarlo, behind the observation position, had the very good sense not to say anything. Cole looked at the data pad. At the flag, at 1,400 meters, still moving in the slowly building morning air. The steel plate at the end of lane 7, that now had 2 distinct impact marks on it, the first one 3 inches from center, the second one inside 1 inch, that would be visible to anyone who walked the lane today and tomorrow, and for as long as the plate was kept on the frame. He looked back at Maya. "I take it to command," he said. "I write the recommendation. I support forward selection candidacy, not next cycle. This cycle." She absorbed it. "That's 3 months early. It's when you're ready. I know when someone is ready now. I know what that looks like and what it doesn't." Something shifted in his jaw. Not quite a muscle. The thing underneath the muscle. "I was wrong about what I was looking at." She didn't say "I know." She didn't say "I told you." She didn't say anything that would make this moment about being right, because it had never been about being right. She held the rifle case against her side and looked at the mountain, where the shadow line had retreated nearly to the ridge line. The thermal was building. In another 30 minutes, the wind would be back, running up the plain from the southeast, and the still morning would be a memory. "One question," she said. Cole waited. "The 1,400-meter flag. You set that up before 300 in the dark, because the existing layout didn't run far enough." "Yes." She looked at him. "When did you decide?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the flag, the one he'd driven out to in the dark, and set up with a battery lamp and a range stake he'd taken from the equipment shed without signing out, because he hadn't wanted to put it in a log yet, wanted to make it official before he understood what he was doing. "When I read the request," he said, "in the office." She nodded. She understood what that meant. He had decided before he'd authorized it. Authorization was the result, not the decision. The decision had been made the moment he read her handwriting in the signature field. She started walking toward the range exit. She walked past Tarlo, who fell into step behind her without being asked. She walked past Delacree, who looked at her over his reading glasses with an expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same address. She did not look back at the lane. She did not need to look back. The plate was there. The marks were there. The atmospheric data was in the pad, and the pad was in Cole's hand, and the pad was in Cole's hand, and it would go into a report that would go to command. And what command did with it was a problem for tomorrow's version of all of them. Today, it was enough that it was done. She walked out of lane 7 extension into the full morning light, the rifle case in her hand, and the dog tags inside her shirt, and a number 1,500 that fit beside the other number, like a second heartbeat catching up to the first. Behind her, Cole stood at the spotting scope and didn't move for a long time. He was listening to the distant echo of the last shot, still going somewhere in the thin high air above the plane. He was thinking about Reyes, not the way he usually thought about him, with the weight of it, the specific gravity of an unhealed thing. He was thinking about what Reyes would have said if he'd been standing at this spotting scope on this morning, looking at those 2 impact marks on a steel plate at 1,500 meters. He thought Reyes would have grinned, the wide, uncomplicated grin of a man who could recognize exceptional work without it costing him anything, because that had been in Reyes's character, a generosity that Cole had not always had himself. Stood at the scope. He let himself feel the shape of it, the loss, unchanged, and underneath the loss, something else. something lighter. The recommendation was already forming in his head. He knew the exact language command would need. He knew the structure of the argument. He'd written these before, when he still wrote them, and the words came back to him now with the ease of something that had always been there, waiting to be used again. Pulled out his notebook. He started writing. Outside, the sun crested the ridgeline, and the first breath of thermal wind moved through Lane 7 extension, turning the flags at 300 and 600 meters in a slow, decisive arc toward the east. The day had arrived. Cole's recommendation reached the command element's desk by 1,400 that same day. He had written 4 pages, not 4 pages of qualification scores and atmospheric data and technical metrics, though those were in there, attached as appendices in the compact professional language of range documentation. The 4 pages were argument. The kind of argument you write when you know the person reading it is going to push back, and you need to have already answered the push before it comes. He had not written one of these in 14 months. The command element at Pacific Horizon was a 2-person structure for training decisions. Major Delacroix, who administered the SWOTP pipeline, and Colonel Nadia Forsyth, who commanded the base's Special Operations Training Group, and whose signature was required on any forward selection candidacy that deviated from the standard cycle timeline. Forsyth had come up through intelligence before transitioning to training command, and she had the specific skepticism of someone who had spent years reading reports that told her what people wanted her to believe rather than what was true. She applied that skepticism to everything, including recommendations from instructors she respected. Cole respected her for it. It made the current situation more difficult, and he respected her for it anyway. He was called to the command office at 1,600. Forsyth was behind the desk. Delacroix was in the chair to the left, with the range data pad and a printed copy of Cole's recommendation in front of him. The room had the particular quality of a space where decisions get made, not decorated, not comfortable, just functional, in a way that communicated the room's purpose without having to announce it. Forsyth looked up when Cole entered. She had short gray hair and brown eyes that cataloged things quickly and filed them in order of relevance. She had Cole's 4 pages on the desk in front of her. Several lines were underlined. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She looked at the pages. "You're recommending forward selection candidacy for SWOTP Recruit Sterling. Maya, 3 months ahead of standard cycle on the basis of the Pacific Basin evaluation and this morning's Lane 7 performance." She said it as a summary, not a question. "And you're writing this 14 months after telling me in this room, in that chair, that you were done writing accelerated recommendations." "Yes," Cole said. "Just yes." "You want more than yes?" She looked at him over the top of the pages. "I want to know what's different." Cole put his hands flat on his thighs. He had thought about this on the walk from his office, running the specific version of the answer that was true without being the version that was about him. He had not found it, and he had decided that the version that was about him was the one he was going to use, because anything else would be a lie, and Forsyth would identify it in under a minute. "What's different is that this time I'm not pushing," he said. "Every recommendation I've written, I've been pushing someone into a slot I thought they could grow into. This one I'm not pushing. I'm reporting. She's already in the slot. I'm just writing down where she is." Forsyth was quiet. "Reyes was a kid with a ceiling I couldn't see yet, and I pushed him past it," Cole continued. "Sterling doesn't have a ceiling I can find. That's a different situation, and I'm treating it as a different situation." Delacroix looked at the data pad. He didn't speak, but his expression had the quality of someone who is not disagreeing. Forsyth set down the pages. She picked up the range documentation from the data pad printout. She looked at the atmospheric log, the flag readings, the impact placement record from the spotter's notation. She looked at the composite from the evaluation in the day before. She looked at the wind call cards from weeks 1 and 2 of the pipeline. You've been tracking her since week 1, she said. Since the first evaluation, yes. Without reporting to me. Tracking was inside standard instructor, monitoring protocol. I wasn't required to escalate until I had a pattern that met the reporting threshold. And the threshold was? He didn't answer immediately. When I was sure. Another silence. The kind that has shape. Forsyth picked up the pages again. She went to the last one, where the language shifted from technical summary to direct argument. She read a section that Cole had written at 1,100 that morning, before the ink was dry on the range notation, before he'd had anything to eat since the night before. She read it twice. Then she set the pages down. She's 19, Forsyth said. She's been doing the work of someone twice her experience for the duration of the pipeline. Can recalibrate the age, can I? It was not a question. The alternative is to hold her to a timeline that doesn't apply to what she actually is. Costs us a capability, and it costs her a position she's already earned. He paused. Program has a mechanism for this situation. The mechanism exists because this situation was always going to happen eventually. I'm using it. Forsyth looked at him for a long moment. Cole held it without looking away and without performing confidence he didn't feel. Because what he felt was not confidence, it was the specific certainty of a person who has run the numbers from every angle and arrived at the same answer each time. I want to talk to her, Forsyth said. Cole didn't react. When? Now. She looked at Delacroix. Get her. Maya was in the equipment bay when Delacroix found her. She was returning range equipment, the bipod, the rear bag, 3 sets of scope rings, and signing each item back into inventory with the careful handwriting she used for anything that was going to be in a file. She had showered and changed and eaten a full meal since the morning, and she looked, Delacroix thought, almost entirely normal, like someone who had had a productive day at work and was finishing the administrative portion of it before going off duty. Colonel Forsyth wants to speak with you, he said. Maya signed the last item, handed the clipboard to the equipment NCO. Now? Now. She followed him out of the bay. She did not ask what it was about. She knew what it was about. She'd known Cole's recommendation was going in. He'd told her as much, standing at the spotting scope in the early light, and she'd known it would reach Forsyth before end of day. She had spent the afternoon preparing for this conversation the same way she prepared for a shot, running the atmospheric variables in her head, reading the conditions, building a firing solution she could hold. She was not nervous. She was focused. Those were still different things. The command office was smaller than she'd expected. She had built it larger in her mind during the weeks she'd been on base, in the way that rooms where important things happen tend to be built larger in the imagination than they turn out to be, in fact. 3 people in it made it feel occupied. 4 made it slightly crowded. Forsyth looked at her the way she'd looked at Cole, quickly, thoroughly, filing. Sit, Forsyth said. Maya sat. Cole was in the chair across the desk. She didn't look at him. Forsyth folded her hands on the desk. She had the pages in front of her and the data documentation ends beside them, but she wasn't looking at either. She was looking at Maya. Your pipeline qualification scores are documented, she said. The evaluation composite is documented. This morning's Lane 7 performance is documented. I've read all of it. She paused. I'm not going to ask you to justify the numbers. Numbers don't lie, and you didn't produce them in a vacuum. No, Maya said. What I'm going to ask you is different. Forsyth leaned forward slightly. Forward selection cadre is not a performance environment. It's an operational environment. The assessment cycle runs 8 weeks and involves a level of sustained ambiguity and pressure that the pipeline doesn't replicate. She said it without drama as a fact, the way someone describes terrain. Recruits who perform at the top of the pipeline sometimes encounter the cadre environment and find that their performance was range-dependent. They can shoot. They cannot do everything else that shooting in a real context requires. Maya waited. Can you? Forsyth said. Can I what, specifically? Forsyth's expression didn't change. She had the patience of a woman who asks direct questions and waits without discomfort for the answer she's actually looking for. Can you operate under sustained ambiguity? Can you take direction from a team structure you didn't build? Can you make decisions at speed in degraded information environments without the time to prepare the way you prepared for this morning? Maya was quiet for a moment. She was not collecting herself. She was being honest with the question, which was harder. I don't know, she said. Forsyth's head moved slightly. Not quite a tilt, an adjustment. I know what I can do on a range, Maya continued. I know what I can do in the training scenarios we've run here, which are controlled environments with defined parameters. I know that my response to unexpected variable introduction, the secondary target in the evaluation, this morning's conditions, is faster than average. She paused. What I don't know is what I do when someone I'm working with makes a call I think is wrong, and I can't take the time to run the analysis. I've never been in that situation at operational tempo. Cole was very still. Forsyth looked at her for a long time. Then she looked at Cole. She just answered your recommendation more honestly than you did. I know, Cole said. That's part of the recommendation. Forsyth looked at Maya again. You understand what you just said removes the clean argument for your candidacy. I understand that telling you I can do something I don't yet know I can do would remove the argument more completely. Maya met her gaze. I can learn everything I just said. I haven't learned yet. Cannot learn the ballistics. Those are already there. Question of which one you need first is yours to make, not mine. The room was quiet. Forsyth unfolded her hands. She picked up Cole's recommendation and read the last section one more time. She set it down. She looked at Delacroix. He said, I've been watching her for a month. She knows what she doesn't know. That's more than half the work. Forsyth picked up a pen. She made 2 notations on the recommendation form. Cole recognized the notation structure from previous cycles, the marks she made when she was modifying a recommendation rather than rejecting it. Conditional forward candidacy, Forsyth said. She completes the remaining 3 weeks of the standard pipeline, including the final integrated assessment. She does not skip the assessment cycle, she runs it in full. If she completes it at the same level as the past 6 weeks, the candidacy converts to unconditional and she enters the next selection cadre. She looked at Maya. Not 3 months early, 6 weeks early, and she earns it, not the name. Maya didn't hesitate. Yes, that's not a question. No, it's an agreement. Forsyth looked at her for one more moment. Then she signed the form. You're dismissed. Maya stood. She looked at Cole, briefly. He was looking at the desk, and she couldn't read what was on his face clearly enough to interpret it. And then she turned and walked out of the room. In the corridor outside, she stopped and stood with her back against the wall for exactly 10 seconds. Not because she needed to compose herself. Because she needed to compose herself. Because she had been in that room for 12 minutes carrying the full weight of the arithmetic, and she needed to set it down before she walked anywhere else. 10 seconds. Then she walked. The 3 weeks that followed were not easy in the way things are sometimes not easy when the difficulty is decorative, a performance of hardship over a foundation of certainty. They were not easy because they were genuinely hard, and the specific way they were hard was the way that Forsyth had described: sustained ambiguity, team structure, degraded information environments. Final integrated assessment ran across 4 days and involved 3 Pacific Horizon teams operating in a simulated operational theater with rotating command structures, real-time intelligence feeds that were partially accurate and partially seeded with false information, and evaluation criteria that were not disclosed to the participants until after each phase concluded. Maya was assigned to Team 2 as the designated long-range shooter. Her team leader was a second-year operator named Sergeant First Class Britta Vasquez, 31 years old, from Texas. With the flat practical directness of someone who had been leading people in difficult personal situations long enough to have stripped away everything that wasn't useful. On the first day, Vasquez made a tactical call that Maya thought was wrong. A route choice through a simulated urban corridor that exposed the team's right flank during the transition phase. Maya had looked at the map for 4 minutes before Vasquez called the route, and her red said left approach along the secondary line was cleaner. She almost said it. She looked at Vasquez's face, the certainty there, the speed of the decision, forward-leaning posture of a woman who had made this kind of call many times in the field and was moving on the decision before the analysis finished, and she thought about what Forsyth had asked her. Can you take direction from a team structure you didn't build? She took the right flank. The flank exposure cost them 40 seconds on the phase evaluation. Not catastrophic, not clean. The scoring took 3 points off their phase composite. That evening in the debrief, Vasquez reviewed the route choice. She walked the team through her logic. She had taken the right approach because her intelligence red indicated a soft compromise at the left approach entry point, a piece of the seeded information that had turned out to be true. They'd gone left, the exposure would have been worse. Maya sat with that for a full 30 seconds before she spoke. I would have taken left, she said. Vasquez looked at her. Why? My read on the map said the right flank was exposed during the transition window. It was. For 40 seconds. I calculated longer. You calculated wrong. A pause. Several of the team members were watching the exchange without looking like they were watching it. Yeah, Maya said, I did. Vasquez studied her. You almost said something during the call. Yes. Why didn't you? Maya thought about how to answer that, honestly. Because I didn't know yet whether my read was better than yours or just different. Vasquez was quiet. Then she said, next time you think you see something I'm missing, say it. Not as a challenge, as an information. I can take information. She looked around the table. All of you. That's how this works. You don't keep the picture to yourself because you're not sure it changes anything. You hand it to the person who's deciding and let them weigh it. The whole mechanism. Maya filed that. She used it the next day when she handed Vasquez a wind red on the approach corridor that altered the sniper deployment angle by 30 degrees, and Vasquez took it and adjusted the plan in 45 seconds without breaking stride. And the day after that, when she saw the false intelligence for what it was, a consistency break in the pattern of the enemy commander's movement that didn't align with the behavioral model in the brief, and said, so, quietly, to Vasquez, who pulled up the pattern data and ran the check and confirmed it in 3 minutes. They were the only team to identify the false intelligence before acting on it. Their phase composite went up 11 points. Cole observed the assessment from the evaluation cadre's position. He was not supposed to be attached to team. Too specifically, the observation roles were rotated to prevent instructor bias from influencing evaluation outcomes. But on the third day, by the particular alchemy of schedule adjustments and a short-staffed observation pool, he ended up in the position that covered Team 2's primary operating zone for the afternoon phase. He watched Maya from the observation platform for 4 hours. He watched her move through a simulated compound environment as part of a four-person clearance element, communicating on the team net with the compressed, exact efficiency of someone who has been taught to say the minimum necessary and has understood why that minimum is the right amount. He watched her take position on an overwatch angle that Vasquez had not assigned a gap in the coverage arc that Maya had identified on approach and filled without announcement, simply because it needed to be filled, and she was the one who saw it. He watched Vasquez's face when she noticed, a short, contained nod. The recognition of someone who has found the right person for the right position. He wrote nothing in his notebook during that 4-hour block. He just watched. On the final evening of the assessment, after the scores were consolidated and the debrief had concluded, Cole found Maya at the range. Not lane 7, the standard lanes, under the lights, at 300 meters. She was running a short string, not for score, for maintenance, keeping the muscle memory current keeping the pressure of the assessment from creating a gap in the tactile relationship between her hands and the mechanism. He stood at the edge of the lit area and watched her fire 3 rounds. She looked up. She had heard him coming. She always heard people coming. Assessment composite, she said. 3rd overall out of 6 teams. 1st in intelligence accuracy. Your team's sniper deployment metrics were the highest of the evaluation. She absorbed this, turned back to the range, fired her 4th round. Vasquez submitted a supplemental commendation, he said. Unsolicited. She noted your intelligence read on day 3. Pattern break. Yes. She fired the 5th round. Then she set the rifle on the bipod and turned fully to face him. She was doing the thing she sometimes did, the complete focus, the absolute contact, and he had stopped finding it disconcerting. He had started understanding it as simply the way she paid attention when something mattered. Forsyth is going to convert, he said. The candidacy, based on the assessment results. She told me this afternoon. Maya was quiet. Forward selection cadre starts in 6 weeks, he said. You'll be the youngest entrant in the program's recorded history. Still quiet. Say something, he said, after a moment. She looked at the range, at the holes in the target, the lights on the range perimeter casting their flat white illumination across the desert hardpan. My father didn't make it to 35, she said. He knew what he was doing, and he was excellent at it, and he died anyway. She paused. I've thought about that every day for 4 years. The possibility that being the best at the thing doesn't protect you from the thing. Cole said nothing. I'm not afraid of it, she said. I just want you to know I've done the accounting. I know what this costs and what it can cost. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to be comfortable with the risk. I'm telling you I've already sat with it. He looked at her for a long time. I know, he said. She nodded. She picked up the rifle and began breaking it down. Cole stood with his hands at his sides and thought about what to say, and found that most of what came to mind was either too much or not enough. He settled on your father's performance file, the classified section. She looked up. I don't have the clearance to read it, he said, but I've read enough adjacent documentation to know that what Hargrove told you at Fort Arclight was accurate. Possibly conservative. She was very still. I don't know if that matters to you now, he said. You've already done what you came here to do. It matters, she said quietly. He nodded. He turned to leave. Cole, he stopped. She was looking at the rifle parts laid out on the mat. Not at him. You wrote 4 pages. For a recruit you'd known for 6 weeks. Yes. Why 4? He thought about it. Because 2 wasn't enough and 6 was too many. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. He walked off the range. The morning the selection cadre confirmation arrived in the official system, 3 things happened in a sequence that would not have been notable to anyone observing it from outside, but that registered for the people involved with the specific weight of moments that are simultaneously the conclusion of one thing and the beginning of another. Forsyth sent Cole a 1-line message. Candidacy confirmed. Sterling, M forward selection cadre, cycle 7. Good work. Cole read it twice, printed it, put it in the drawer with the citation he never opened. Then he went to the range and reset the lane 7 target frames because they needed to be reset, insisted Cesis. And he was the one there to do it. Tarlo found Maya at the processing unit at 730, where she was filing her forward candidacy acceptance documentation in the same careful handwriting she used for anything that was going to be in a file. Heard it's confirmed, he said. Heard right. He sat down across from her. He put his elbows on the table and his chin in his hands, and he looked at her with the open, uncomplicated directness that had been in his character from the first day. Underneath, the reflex smile, subjects the social positioning. Are you scared? He said. She kept writing. Of what specifically? Forward cadre. First real operational assessment. Being the youngest person in the room. A pause. All of it. She finished the line she was writing, looked up. "Ask me again after I've done it," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and stood up. "Fair answer," he said. She looked back at the form. In the equipment bay down the hall, the rifle case was already packed. She had packed it that morning, before 600, in the dark, because she liked the ritual of it, the order of the components, the way the foam held the geometry of the rifle, the sound of the latches closing on something that was ready. She filled in the last line of the acceptance form. She signed her name, Sterling Maya. She looked at it for 1 second. Then she picked up the pen and wrote, in the space below the signature line, where it said, "Additional notes optional," nothing. There was nothing additional to say. The form said what it needed to say. She filed it. She picked up her kit bag and walked toward the door and did not look back at the processing unit or the table or the chair, because looking back was not a thing she had ever needed to do to know what she was leaving behind. Outside, the desert was flat and white, and the mountain was the same mountain, and the wind was beginning its daily climb from the southeast, turning the range flags in their slow arc. She had 6 weeks. She knew what to do with them. The 6 weeks moved the way compressed time always moves when the work inside it is real, not fast. Exactly. But without waste, each day spending itself fully before the next one arrived. Maya ran the standard pipeline completion in the first 2 weeks. Final integrated field exercises, communications assessments, the written tactical examination that covered doctrine, threat analysis, and decision-making under information scarcity. She completed each component without drama and without the particular performance of someone who knows they are being watched. It was being watched. She knew it. She did the work anyway, the same way she'd always done it, because the work was the point, not the audience. Kettrick passed his final assessment on the second attempt. He had failed the first run of the tactical examination by 3 points, not catastrophic, not career-ending, but the kind of miss that resets a person's understanding of where they actually stand. Maya heard about it from Tarlow, who mentioned it without editorializing, which was the right way to mention it. She thought about Kettrick for approximately 90 seconds. She thought about the concrete barrier and the windsocks and the conversation where he'd almost apologized and hadn't quite gotten there. She thought about the fact that he'd made it through slower than he'd planned, with a detour, but through, and that the detour had probably done more for him than the clean path would have. She didn't know for certain. It wasn't her accounting to run. On the last Friday of the pipeline, the cohort received their completion certifications in the briefing room at 1,600. 11 of the original 15. The 4 who hadn't made it were represented only by the absence of their names on the list, which was its own kind of notation. Delacroix handed out the certifications. He shook each person's hand with the measured warmth of someone who had done this many times and still meant it each time, which was a harder thing to maintain than it looked. When he reached Maya, he held the handshake a half-second longer than the others. Not conspicuous. Just there. Cole was in the back of the room. He was not handing out anything. He stood with his arms at his sides, not crossed. Maya noticed the default posture he'd carried for weeks, and he looked at the cohort with an expression that was as close to unguarded as she had seen on him. After the ceremony, as the group dispersed toward the mess hall and the particular release of energy that follows the end of a long structured thing, Cole caught her at the door. "Weeks," he said. 6 weeks, she said. He handed her a printed document. She looked at it. It was the range record sheet, the official one, from the base's performance registry, updated with her composite from the Pacific Basin evaluation. Her name was at the top. Her score was next to it. Below it, in the remarks column, was a single notation in the range officer's handwriting. 500 meters confirmed. Lane 7 extension. Atmospheric data on file. She looked at it for a moment. "It's not the classified file," Cole said. "That's still above my clearance. This one's public record. Anyone can read it. She folded the document once and put it in her shirt pocket over the dog tags. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He was going to say something else. She could see the shape of it forming, and then he didn't, which was fine. Some things didn't need to be said to have been communicated. She walked out. The forward selection cadre for Cycle 7 operated out of a facility called Station Ridgeback, 6 hours northeast of Pacific Horizon by vehicle, in a stretch of high desert terrain that made Pacific Horizon look lush by comparison. The land there was bone-dry and lunar, cut through with dry creek beds and ridgelines that the wind had been sharpening for 1,000 years. Facility itself was sparse: a main operations building, a barracks block, a vehicle pool, and the range complex, which was larger and more varied than anything at Pacific Horizon, and which had been designed specifically to resist the kind of preparation that candidates tried to do in advance. You couldn't prepare for Ridgeback, the documentation said. You could only be ready or not ready, and the difference between those two things was not something you built in the 6 weeks before you arrived. It was something you built over years, or you hadn't built it. Maya arrived on a Sunday evening with her kit bag and the rifle case and the dog tags and the printed range record folded in her shirt pocket, which she'd carried every day since Cole handed it to her. She had read it once that first evening and hadn't taken it out again. She didn't need to read it. She knew what it said. The Cycle 7 cadre held 22 candidates. She was the youngest by 3 years. The next youngest was a man named Sergeant Paulo Irwin, 22, out of a reconnaissance battalion in the Pacific Theater, who had arms like load-bearing cables and the quiet confidence of someone who had been in difficult situations and had come out of them with his sense of himself intact. She met him at the vehicle pool during the administrative intake. "Sterling," he said, reading her name tape, the way people read name tapes. "Irwin," she said, reading his. "You're the one who shot 97.4 at Pacific Horizon." "Yes, and the 1,500. Yes." He looked at her without the recalibration she had learned, to identify the moment when a face adjusts to accommodate a number that doesn't fit its expectation. He just nodded. "Good. I've been hoping there'd be at least one shooter in the cadre who can hold distance." He extended a hand. "I'm on your team if we get a choice." She shook it. "We probably won't get a choice." "Probably not." He shrugged. Still, for the record, they were, as it happened, assigned to the same 4-person element on day 3. Neither of them mentioned having called it. Cadre ran 8 weeks. The documentation had been accurate about the ambiguity. It was the defining texture of every phase, the thing that made Ridgeback different from everything that preceded it. The information was always incomplete. The windows were always compressed. Command structure rotated every 72 hours. So the person making decisions at the top of the element today would be executing someone else's decisions tomorrow, and the psychological requirement of that cycling, the ability to lead, and then immediately subordinate, and then lead again without losing your calibration, was what separated the candidates who completed the cadre from the ones who didn't. Maya led on her first rotation and made 2 errors. One was recoverable, a route choice that cost the team 12 minutes on a movement phase, which she identified, corrected, and reported to the evaluation cadre without being asked. The other was not recoverable in the phase, but was recoverable in the debrief. She held information too long before distributing it, waiting until she was certain rather than handing it to the team while she was still processing, which cost them the window for a clean decision. She sat with that one for a full day. She thought about what Vasquez had said: "You don't keep the picture to yourself because you're not sure it changes anything. You hand it to the person who's deciding and let them weigh it." She had learned it. She had not yet fully internalized it. There was a difference between understanding a principle and having it in your body, in the reflex, in the compressed window moment when you don't have time to remember the lesson, and have to be the lesson already. She ran the next rotation differently. When she was executing subordinate to Irwin's lead, she handed him information in real time, partial and flagged as partial, and let him work with it. He was good at working with partial information. He had the ability to hold uncertainty, which was one of the rarest things Maya had encountered in a training environment, and which she recognized because she was still developing it herself. By week 4, the element had the highest phase composite in the cadre. By week 6, the cadre evaluation officer, a laconic master sergeant named Delray, who communicated primarily through eyebrow adjustments and written notation, had put a star next to the element's designation on his tracking board, which Irwin pointed out to Maya on a day when they were passing the board in the corridor. "That's a good sign," Irwin said. "Or it means he's watching us for something," Maya said. "Why can't it be both?" She looked at the star. "It's probably both." The final assessment phase at Ridgeback was called the persistent scenario, and it was structured to run continuously for 96 hours without defined pauses, a simulated operational environment where the threat picture evolved in real time, the intelligence degraded and updated on no predictable schedule, and the physical demands accumulated without the recovery periods that shorter assessments allowed. Sleep deprivation was part of the design. So was hunger. The resupply cadence was deliberately irregular. So was the particular psychological erosion that comes from sustained uncertainty without resolution. The way the mind starts negotiating with itself about what is real and what is noise when the signal-to-noise ratio has been degraded long enough. Professionally, Maya was 61 into the persistent scenario when the situation that Forsyth had described, the one she hadn't been able to answer, arrived. The element was deployed on an overwatch position, covering a simulated compound that was assessed as containing the scenario's primary target. The intelligence picture had been running clean for 6 hours, which was long enough to make her suspicious of it. So, clean pictures at Ridgeback were usually the setup for something. The element leader at that rotation was a candidate named Sergeant First Class Ren Okafor Sharp, decisive, with the kind of controlled impatience that in a leader either drives a team forward or burns it out, depending on the conditions. She had been pushing the element hard for the last 8 hours, and the team was running on compressed margins. Hour 62, Maya's observation of the compound produced a pattern break. A shift in the movement schedule of the figures inside a delay of approximately 4 minutes from the established pattern, which could mean nothing, or could mean the target had been alerted and was preparing to move or had already moved. Okafor's plan called for element movement to the breach position in 18 minutes. Target had moved. The breach would be into an empty compound, a failed phase objective. If the target had been alerted and was preparing, the breach timing would hit a prepared response. Pattern break was noise and natural variation, fatigue-related, meaningless. Then raising it would delay the movement, compress the window, and possibly cost the phase on timing. Maya had been awake for 62 hours. She was not certain. Keyed her radio. Okafor, Sterling. "I've got a pattern anomaly. 4-minute delay on movement cycle at primary. Could be noise." Flagging it. A pause. Okafor's voice came back flat and fast. "How confident?" 60%. Not higher. Another pause. Longer. Okafor was running her own arithmetic on a compressed timeline. Delay movement. Extended observation. 10 minutes. Copy, they waited 10 minutes. At minute 7, the primary target appeared at the compound's eastern access point. Not the expected location with 2 personnel flanking him, and a movement posture that indicated departure, not routine activity. Okafor adjusted the plan in 4 minutes. The revised breach caught the target in the transition, which was a harder problem than a static compound, but a solvable one. Phase objective achieved. In the debrief, Okafor looked at Maya across the table with an expression that had shed its impatience somewhere in the previous 10 days and replaced it with something that looked like straightforward regard. "Percent call," Okafor said. "You weren't certain." "No. You called it anyway." Yes. Okafor looked at her for a moment. Good. She said it simply, the way people say things they mean, without needing them to mean more than they are. Then she moved to the next agenda item. Maya sat with the word good and let it settle where it's settled. The persistent scenario ended at hour 94. 2 hours early, the cadre evaluation officer called it, because all active objectives had been resolved and extending it would have produced diminishing returns on the assessment data. 22 candidates had entered the cadre. 17 completed the persistent scenario. 15 completed it with satisfactory evaluation outcomes. Maya was one of 15. She slept for 11 hours after the scenario concluded. She didn't dream, or if she did, she didn't remember it. She woke in a room that was completely dark because she had covered the window before she slept, and she lay still for a moment, taking stock of herself the way her father had taught her joint by joint, system by system, finding where the damage was and where there wasn't any. Shoulders, both sore, left worse than right from the sustained rifle work. Hands, tight. The knuckle creases were cracked from the dry air. Neck, functional. A lump at the base of the skull from the pack weight. Everything else, present, operational. Sore in the specific way that means you did something real with your body, and your body is acknowledging it. She got up, got dressed, went outside. The sky over Ridgeback was the particular shade of pre-dawn blue that exists for about 15 minutes before the sun reorganizes everything, and the air was cold enough that her breath showed. She stood on the steps of the barracks block and looked at the range complex and the ridge lines and the long flat reach of the high desert and breathed it in. Irwin came out behind her. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without saying anything, which she appreciated. He stood next to her, and they both looked at the sky. After a while, he said, Okafor told me about the 60% call. Did she? She said it was the thing that held the phase. He drank his coffee. She doesn't hand out those assessments. I've been in the cadre with her for 8 weeks, and she's told exactly 2 people their call held something. Maya drank her coffee. It was too hot and tasted like it had been sitting in a field urn for 2 hours. She drank it anyway. I almost didn't key the radio, she said. Why? Because I wasn't certain. She looked at the ridgeline. I've spent my whole life being certain before I moved. My father drilled it, wait for the clean window, don't force a shot that isn't ready. And I've applied that to everything, not just shooting. She paused. 60% is not a clean window. Irwin was quiet for a moment. But you called it, because Vasquez told me something months ago that I didn't fully get until I was sitting in that observation position at hour 62 with a degraded picture and a hard timeline. She looked at him. You hand it to the person, deciding, and let them weigh it. You don't filter it through your certainty first. Certainty is their problem, not yours. Irwin looked at the ridgeline. That's the thing, isn't it? The difference between a good shooter and a good operator. Yeah, a good shooter waits for the clean window. A good operator hands off an unclean picture and trusts the person holding it. He drank his coffee. How long did it take you to learn that? She thought about it. Honestly, I'm still learning it. I just learned enough of it at hour 62 to do the right thing. He nodded. That was, in his estimation, the right answer. The cadre completion ceremony was brief by design. The culture at Ridgeback did not encourage ceremony, which was itself a cultural statement about where the emphasis belonged. Master Sergeant Del Rey read the names of the 15 completing candidates in alphabetical order, handed each one a laminated card with their assessment summary, and shook each hand with the 2-handed grip that was apparently specific to him, because Maya had not seen it anywhere else. When he reached her name, he read it the same way he'd read all the others, without adjustment, without emphasis. Then he shook her hand with the 2-handed grip and held it a half-second longer than anyone else's, and said, in the same flat voice he used for everything, your pattern call in the persistent scenario will be in the case study rotation next cycle. She looked at him. Not as an example of certainty, he said. As an example of threshold management. He let go of her hand. There's a difference. I know, she said. Good. He moved to the next name. She stood with the laminated card and looked at her assessment summary. At the bottom of the form, in the overall evaluation field, was a single word, recommended. Below it, in Delray's handwriting, because he annotated every form, personally, operator ready. Ploy. She folded the card, put it in her shirt pocket alongside the range record. It was 3 weeks after Ridgeback that Colonel Forsyth called her into the command office at Pacific Horizon, where Maya had returned for the post-cadre administrative processing. The office was the same, the desk, the chair, the window with the view of the range. The meeting had a different quality than the first one. The first one had been an assessment. This one felt like something else. Forsyth had 2 documents on the desk. One was the cadre completion summary from Ridgeback. The other was something in a folder that Maya did not recognize. Sit, Forsyth said. Maya sat. I'm going to show you something, Forsyth said. And then I'm going to ask you what you want to do with it. The decision is yours. I want to be clear about that before you see it. She opened the folder and turned it to face Maya. It was a performance file. Maya recognized the classification header, the same structure as the files she had seen in the program's administrative system. The name on the tab was not her name. It was Sterling Ethan J. She looked at Forsyth. My clearance was upgraded 6 months ago, Forsyth said. I requested a review of your father's classified performance record as part of the background documentation for your candidacy. I wanted to understand the full context. She paused. I should have told you I was doing that. I'm telling you now. Maya looked at the folder. She did not open it. What's in it? She said. Her voice was steady. She was aware that her voice was steady and was grateful for it. The full record of his final operation. The actual documentation of the shot with the true distance and the complete atmospheric data. Forsyth paused, and a notation from the commanding officer at the time explaining the decision to understate the distance in the public record. Why? Politics, as Hargrove told you. And Forsyth stopped. Then, and because command didn't want to set a standard, they didn't believe anyone else could meet. They thought it was a once occurrence, an anomaly. They didn't want to create an expectation. Maya was quiet for a long time. She thought about Hargrove crouching in front of her in the Afghan heat, holding the flag with both hands. Possibly conservative, Cole had said months ago. She'd filed that and hadn't taken it out. What's the actual number? She said. Forsyth looked at her steadily. 1,490 meters. 10 meters further than Hargrove had told her. Hargrove, she thought, had not known the precise figure. Given her the closest thing to truth he had access to. She sat with 1,490 for a moment. She laid it next to 1,500, her own number, from Lane 7, from a still morning 6 months ago, with Cole at the spotting scope and a flag at 1,400 that he'd set up in the dark, and she felt the 10 meters between them, with a clarity that was not competition and not grief. It was completion. The folder is yours, Forsyth said. It's a certified copy. You can take it. Maya looked at it. She reached out and touched the cover, the material of it, the paperweight of the classification header, the tabs and the stamped dates. She thought about opening it. Then she closed her hand on the edge and pushed it gently back across the desk. Keep it in the program record, she said, where it belongs. Forsyth looked at her. I don't need to read it, Maya said. I know what he could do. I knew before I saw a Nilsen number. She looked at Forsyth directly. What I needed to know was what I could do, and I know that now. A long silence. Forsyth closed the folder. She set it to the side of the desk with the deliberate care of someone placing something in its correct position after it has been in the wrong one for too long. There's a second thing, Forsyth said. She picked up the cadre completion summary. Delray's recommendation is operator deployment. Your element designation puts you in a strike support role, long-range precision, intelligence feed, team integration. She looked at the summary. It's the role your profile fits. It's also the role where your father served. Maya said nothing. I'm not telling you that as a pressure, Forsyth said quickly. I'm telling you because I want you to know what you're walking into, with full information. Not a surprise. I know what I'm walking into, Maya said. Do you? My father walked into it and didn't come back, she said. I've thought about that every day for 4 years. I'm walking into it because it's where I can do the most good with what I can do, and because I've done the accounting on the cost and I'm not walking away from it. She looked at Forsyth steadily. That's the answer to the question you asked me in this office 6 months ago, about whether I can operate under sustained ambiguity. The ambiguity is permanent. The cost is real, and I've accepted it. That's the only form of ready that exists. Forsyth held her gaze for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen. She signed the deployment authorization in 2 places. She slid it across the desk. Welcome to the operational program, she said. Don't get killed. I'll do my best, Maya said. She picked up the authorization. Stood. Cole was on the range when she found him lane 7 again, but not at the extension. He was at the 600-meter mark, resetting target frames that had been knocked off angle by the wind. He was doing it by hand, alone, the way he apparently did a lot of physical things on this base methodically, without complaint, as a form of attention to a thing that needed attending to. She stopped at the edge of the lane. He looked up. He looked at her face, and then at the authorization she was holding, and he understood immediately, because he was good at reading what mattered in what he was looking. Matt. Forsyth signed it, he said, this morning. He set down the frame adjustment tool. He looked at her for a moment, the same full contact look, the one she'd learned wasn't assessment anymore. How do you feel? I feel like someone just handed me the next 4 years of my life, and I need to start planning. He almost smiled. The almost smile had become easier to identify over the months. That's practical. That's accurate. He looked at the range. At the 1,500-meter wall, barely visible from here. He looked back at her. I was wrong about you, he said. I just want to say that clearly, outside of a debrief context, without any framing around it. I was wrong. I was protecting myself, and I was calling it caution, and those aren't the same thing. I know, she said. I'm not asking for absolution. I know that too. She looked at him. You wrote 4 pages. You set up the flag at 1,000, 400 before 300. You told me what Forsyth said about the classified file. She paused. You did the work, Cole. The wrong call was early. The right calls came after. That's how it usually goes. Quiet. My father made wrong calls, she said. Good people do. The question is what they do after. She folded the authorization and put it in her shirt pocket, where it settled alongside the range, record, and above the dog tags. You wrote 4 pages. He nodded. It was a slow nod, the kind that carries something behind it. She extended her hand. He shook it. His grip was firm, and he held it for 1 count longer than a professional handshake requires, and then let go. She turned and walked down lane 7. She walked the full length of it without stopping past the 600-meter mark, past the 900, past the 1,000, 200, past the flag at 1,000, 400 that was still in stake from the morning 6 months ago, when Cole had driven out in the dark to set it up. She walked to the 1,500-meter wall and stood in front of it and looked at the C-Stills plate on its frame. 2 impact marks. The first one, upper left, 3 inches from center. The second one, center mass, inside 1 inch. She put her hand on the plate. The metal was warm from the afternoon sun. The edges of the impact marks were sharp under her fingertips, not smooth, not worn. Recent. Still present. She stood there for a moment. Then she took the dog tags out from inside her shirt and held them in her free hand. Sterling, Ethan J., warm from her skin. She thought about him. Not as a legend. She had never needed him to be a legend. as the man who sat in the folding chair in the garage with the rifle disassembled between them and talked to her like she was a person worth talking to, who told her that patience was not the same as waiting and that precision was not the same as caution, who laughed at bad jokes and was a bad cook and left his gear on the floor more often than he should have, and who died at 34 years old in a country far from home doing the thing he was built to do. She thought, I got further. She thought, you would have laughed about that. She thought, I'm going to go do the rest of it now. She put the dog tags back inside her shirt. She took her hand off the plate. She turned around and walked back down lane 7 toward the base. The wind was running at about 12 miles per hour from the southeast, turning the flags at 300, 600 in their familiar arc. The mountains were starting to go purple at the edges with the beginning of evening. She did not look back at the plate. She had never needed to look back at anything to know it was there. 6 months after Maya Sterling entered the operational program, a training protocol she had developed during her cadre period, a method for reading multi-point wind environments in variable thermal conditions, using a weighted average calculation derived from her own range data, was formally adopted by the SWOTP pipeline as a supplemental marksmanship module. Cole wrote the adoption recommendation. It was 2 pages. He had thought about making it 4, and then decided 2 was enough. Kettrick completed his pipeline's certification and was deployed to a support element in the Pacific Theater. He sent Tarlow a message on the day he shipped out that Tarlow later described as surprisingly honest, an acknowledgement, without drama, that he had misjudged certain things at the start and had adjusted. He did not specify what things. He didn't need to. Tarlow entered the Cycle 8 cadre selection 9 months after Maya's departure. He had applied the way he did most things, with the reflex grin on the outside and something much more serious underneath. His performance in the Pacific Basin evaluation ranked 2nd in his cohort. He did not break any records. He was fine with that. Irwin went to a reconnaissance designation in the Western Theater and sent Maya a single message the day he got there. Pattern breaks everywhere out here. Keeping the 60% rule. She read it during a maintenance window and did not respond immediately because she was in the middle of something, but she responded that evening with, "Good. So am I." The classified file on Sterling Ethan J. remained in the program record where Force Scythe had placed it. True distance, 1,490 meters, did not appear in public documentation. It was known to Forsyth and to Cole and to Maya and to the 4 administrative personnel who had processed the file review. It was enough people. The people who needed to know knew. And on Lane 7 at Pacific Horizon, a steel plate at 1,500 meters remained on its frame. Through the following 2 years of training cycles, surface marked by the ongoing work of the range, dozens of impact marks accumulating over time, but in the upper left quadrant and at center mass, 2 marks older than the others remained identifiable to anyone who looked closely enough. The range officer's log noted them in the maintenance record every quarter. Original impacts, Lane 7 extension, Sterling, M pre-deploy session, atmospheric data on file. No one removed them. Nobody suggested it. What Maya Sterling understood by the time she was 21 years old, that takes most people much longer to learn, and some people never learn at all, is that the name that you carry into a room is not the thing that earns you the right to stay in it. The work earns you the right to stay. The work and the willingness to be wrong and the discipline to be honest at the difference between what you know and what you only think you know, and the particular courage it takes to hand uncertain picture to the person who needs it and trust them to do something with it. Her father had left her a name. She had turned it into something else entirely. You are not the shadow someone else cast. You are the light you make with the time you have, in the conditions you're actually given, with the tools you actually carry. That is the only legacy worth leaving.